You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 18th of February 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, the US and Russia meet up for discussion, the restoration of relations and the future of the Ukraine war. We'll examine a gathering that begins to change the course of history. Also coming up in the next 60 minutes, China's President Xi Jinping sits down with the country's business leaders. Will the meeting be enough to strengthen the economy? Plus,
the requirements for residents and even for office owners or users have changed dramatically, especially post-COVID.
We'll hear how Dubai keeps on growing while remaining pedestrian-friendly, and also,
I think difference and local are very powerful in today's world, where everything is so similar.
New York's Museum of Modern Art celebrates one of Portugal's best-loved homeware brands. We'll hear from the company's founder. Plus the newspapers and the opening of the Monocle Café in Paris. That's all ahead on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Israel's defense ministry says it's setting up a body for what it calls the voluntary departures of Palestinians from Gaza. Meanwhile, Israel has begun to withdraw its troops from Lebanon in accordance with the terms of a ceasefire with the militia group Hezbollah. And doctors in Rome are continuing to treat the Pope for what the Vatican has called a complex clinical situation. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, a meeting is taking place today in Saudi Arabia, which a little over a month ago would have been unthinkable. Representatives from the US and Russia will get together with the aim of bringing about an end to the war in Ukraine. Well, I'm joined now from Zurich by Gorana Gergic, who's Monocle's security correspondent and also senior researcher with the Swiss and Euro-Atlantic security team at the ETH Zurich Centre for Security Studies. Good morning, Gorana.
Morning, Emma.
Let's just get this absolutely straight. This meeting is not supposed to happen, is it, given the sanctions imposed on Russia after it invaded Ukraine?
Well, this meeting is unprecedented in a lot of ways, and you're absolutely right. There have been almost no contacts since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion against Ukraine, now nearly 3 years ago. So this is the first significant in-person discussion between US and Russian officials in years, and one that, even though we've sort of been warned would happen, given all of that President Trump was saying in the lead up to the election, and then following that is still taking a lot of people by surprise.
Indeed, we have effectively a meeting between the United States and Russia to determine what happens in Ukraine, and Ukraine is not at the table.
That's right. And this is the main issue that Ukrainians, of course, as well as European allies and partners of the United States, who are now sort of questioning where they sort of sit or stand in that context or ecosystem of US alliances, have as an objection, given that this marks a kind of resurgence of great power politics, of bilateral dominance, where, might, again, makes right and all these sort of tropes, and where essentially those that don't have necessarily nuclear arsenals or several million troops to be deployed at kind of moment's notice are essentially sidelined and made to accept deals that the big ones make at their expense.
Is there a sense here that history is being rewritten starting for today? Because the mere fact that these two parties are meeting to talk about Ukraine after 3 years of war with a new administration in the White House, there's a sense that this is not just disruptive on a surface level, but systemically, the way that the world does business and the way that countries interact and problems are solved, it's changing.
It is indeed hard to sort of push back against that kind of assessment, and I would say it's not just today. I think the past couple of weeks indeed have been feeling like that. And again, there are some of these sayings around history can kind of change in a matter of days, and then there are decades where nothing almost happens, right? And it seems that this period, basically ever since Donald Trump's inauguration, all the way now, we are not even a full month in, that there are so many of norms that have been sort of broken or kind of turned on their head, and again, push back against all of the architecture that was governing essentially interstate relations over the past I would say 7 to 8 decades even, that are now being brought to a question, as they haven't at all in the period since, and basically are even in contrast to what President Trump was doing in his first term between 2017 and 21. And I would start here by saying that the United States actually, under President Trump in this second administration, is playing a role of a revisionist power, something that we haven't been used to, right? The United States was supposed to be this kind of status quo power, wanting to sort of reassert its dominance within the institutions, regimes, organizations, kind of, again, that architecture that it created following the end of World War II. But what it does now is basically acts in a way that's not unlike what Russia and China have been doing, questioning the kind of sovereignty, the integrity of international borders. We've heard that, of course, with different sort of pretenses on territories all the way from Greenland to Canada to Panama. But now, of course, by sidelining Ukraine, by saying that Ukraine can't participate in talks that concern its own future, and in that way is, again, behaving much like what Russia has been doing, saying that Ukraine doesn't get a say in deciding its future, right? That it's about Russia's sphere of influence and its interests in the so-called near abroad that will ultimately determine how things go.
And as we saw yesterday, the Europeans tried very hard to come to a consensus on to how to respond to this, given the fact that the Ukraine conflict is absolutely on their doorstep. But there were divisions, weren't there, about the level of military engagement and indeed the amount of response that the Europeans should have?
And again, we are back to those same kind of themes in the context of transatlantic relations, and in particular around the kind of unity on the European continent when it comes to European security and defense, which was again on full display yesterday when Emmanuel Macron convened this emergency summit to formulate some sort of cohesive strategy, given the urgency and the gravity of this situation. What we've seen again is something that shouldn't have happened in the first place, because again, it's not like we haven't been warned, right? This could have been expected under those sort of baskets of worst case scenarios, right? And again, this is something that Trump administration has been talking about as in the interregnum period and in the sort of weeks in office over the past month. But what we've seen is basically divergence over some of the key issues, whether we are talking about troop deployments as part of the peacekeeping mission, or whether this would be at all a subject of discussion, because there are dissonant voices over whether any kind of deal should be hashed out or accepted at this moment, or Europeans should truly insist to be at the table. So we've seen, differences here between Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, versus, for instance, Olaf Scholz, who is now in his final week before the election takes place in Germany. But then also some of the rifts over who got invited to this summit in the first place, because it was basically promoted as the main European countries. And you heard a lot of voices from the smaller European countries saying we didn't even get a seat at the table. It was Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, Netherlands, Denmark, European Council representatives, European Commission, NATO, of course, United Kingdom, which is out of the European Union, but also having a seat at the table, but not some of the smaller states which might have a say in all of this, or who might have actually borders with Ukraine or Russia and so on. So again, all of these things are not helpful at the moment if Europeans are to basically come up with some sort of response that is cohesive, that is strong enough, and that is able to, again, reassert the fact that they can't just be takers in any kind of deal that's made in Riyadh or somewhere else. And I would, again, say maybe here that we shouldn't expect anything major to come out of this summit by way of a final peace deal or anything that could be credibly committed to by either of the sides.
Well, let's talk about who's around the table for this. We have, from the Americans' side, we have Secretary of State Marco Rubio, we have Michael Waltz, the National Security Advisor, we have Steve Witkoff, friend of the President and Middle Eastern envoy. They've been in government for, what, a month, with not an extensive amount of international diplomatic experience, let's put it that way. We then have on the other side of the table Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister. He's been running this track for the best part of 20 years. I mean, what is it likely going to be like in that room? Because the Russians will know everything that the Americans will want to talk about.
In that kind of first blush assessment, you're absolutely right. Russians are sending people who have been kind of evergreen, part of the kind of furniture, if you will, of foreign policy bureaucracy and Russia's foreign affairs. Of course, Sergei Lavrov has been there all along, basically since Putin's ascendance to power in early 2000s. On the US side, what I would note is that it's not about who's going to be present necessarily as to who's going to be absent from these talks. And I would say that one person who was touted to be, one of the key people in brokering any kind of deal surrounding Ukraine is Keith Kellogg, who is US's representative or special envoy, if you wish, to Ukraine. He's not going to be around. And it is quite interesting that Steve Witkoff, as you mentioned, who is President Trump's Middle East envoy, is all of a sudden promoted to this role that he sits at that table together with Lavrov and Ushakov, as opposed to Keith Kellogg, who is supposed to be a person who has a deep knowledge or who should have an idea of how this conflict is faring and where Americans would like it to go. On the Rubio and Waltz side, I don't think this is a kind of controversial list of invites, of course, because they are basically there as the counterparts for Lavrov and Ushakov. So in terms of their stances, I think they have shown over the past month that basically what they're doing is following President Trump's line without much divergence, and I don't expect that there's going to be a whole lot of discrepancy there. The only question is now, and that's the big one, whether the United States truly has a plan and a kind of end game, or is this more kind of a talk now for show, and then they'll kind of figure it out as they go. And my strong suspicion at the moment, given the kind of lack of details and given how a lot of this is being done for optics primarily, is that there is no firm plan as yet.
Gorana Gergich, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Zurich. You're listening to The Globalist. 15:14 in Beijing, 7:14 a.m. here in London. Let's continue to explore the effect that the new Trump administration is having on another superpower, that of China. President Xi Jinping has held an unusual meeting, bringing in the country's tech giant bosses to urge them to show their talent and to have confidence in the power of the Chinese model and market. I quote. It is being interpreted as a sign that Beijing is worried about a slowdown in growth and a trade war with the United States. Well, I'm joined now by Isabel Hilton, founder of China Dialogue and a visiting professor at King's College London's Lau Institute. Good morning. Welcome back, Isabel.
Good morning. Very good to be here.
Good to have you. Who was at this meeting then?
Well, all the tech giants. I don't know if you remember the dancing robots. Well, the man whose company produced the dancing robots was there. Jack Ma was there. Jack Ma, who had been on the naughty step for more than 2 years, was there. So it was essentially, it was high tech. The founder of DeepSeek, which has done so much for the Chinese stock market and Chinese reputation. The heads of Xiaomi, the head of Meituan, and the head of Huawei, Ren Zhengfei. He's the founder of Huawei. And these are companies that offer a real challenge to American technology, particularly Huawei. As we know, it's been building advanced telecoms all around the world. So this is a showcase of China's prowess in advanced technologies. Interesting to note who wasn't there also. Absolutely no property tycoons who are rather less popular in China, despite having driven the growth for the past 20 years. Interesting also, no JD.com, that's the Chinese equivalent of Amazon, and no Baidu, which is another internet giant. So quite specific, essentially saying, we're going to wipe the floor with the United States, and these are the companies that will do it.
So it was exactly just that when you mentioned the fact that you had the owner, the boss of DeepSeek at the meeting, DeepSeek having actually caused such a disturbance in the last couple of weeks in terms of questioning the longevity and the durability of the big US tech giants and AI giants. I mean, was this a hurriedly pulled together meeting where Xi Jinping had to effectively, send a message outwards to the likes of the United States saying, we've got you, but also to send a message internally to China to say, actually, we need to pull our socks up and get going?
Yes, I think, it's a meeting also staged in advance of the two big political meetings which come up in March. And it sort of sits in between the revelation about DeepSeek, which one of the effects of that, apart from causing consternation around the world, was that it sent the Chinese stock market, it gave a kind of adrenaline shot to the Chinese stock market, and anything that gives a shot to the economy right now is frankly welcome. They're expected to set a 5% growth target at the upcoming meetings again, despite the fact that this year they clearly haven't met the target, and they've now the Chinese authorities are now resorting to suppressing news about the economy because, frankly, it's bad. China needs to export. It needs to export kind of, pretty good technologies at the moment. So those are renewables and electric vehicles. But they're facing increasingly closed markets. The United States, clearly. The European Union, very nervous, has imposed tariffs on electric vehicles. But they're not alone. Turkey, Brazil, countries that are friends of China are also very nervous that the overcapacity in the Chinese industrial sector is simply going to wipe out their own industries because China, is going to dump these things on the market. So barriers are going up all around, and domestic consumption is very, very flat. So we're seeing all these measures which have included trying to persuade China's increasingly elderly population to spend, breaking the habits of a lifetime, I have to say, because they are big savers, not spenders. So you can see all these measures. They've been relaxing, credit rules for banks, desperately trying to get the economy out of its doldrums. And this is a signal that you can come back. It's okay. You're safe. Remember, Jack Ma, they wiped $1 trillion off the value of Jack Ma's Ant Group when they intervened to prevent his IPO because he made a speech they didn't like. So, it's a nervous relationship. And these high-tech giants can go and operate elsewhere. So it's partly saying, no, it's okay, stay in China, and signaling to the United States that we're match fit for whatever you unleash on us now.
Isabel Hilton, thank you as ever for joining us on Monocle Radio. Still to come on today's programme.
We often recommend that any master plan that is beyond 5 to 10 years needs to accommodate what the teenagers currently want, because they're going to be the residents of this in the future.
We talk about agility in urban planning in Dubai a little bit later on in The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
7:20 a.m. here in London. Now, 18 people have been injured after a Delta Airlines plane crashed on landing and flipped upside down at Toronto International Airport. Footage has shown fire crews spraying the aircraft with foam as it sat in heavy snow. All 80 passengers and crew were accounted for. A little earlier, Monocle's Toronto correspondent Thomas Lewis sent us this update.
Well, the US Aviation Authority, which has said that it will assist with the investigation into what exactly took place in Toronto yesterday, says that it was at around 2:45 in the afternoon that this Delta Airlines flight that was travelling from Minneapolis to Toronto appears to have crashed upon landing at Toronto Pearson International Airport, which is Canada's busiest airport, before then flipping over onto its roof. Now, some fairly dramatic images began circulating fairly quickly online, which showed the overturned aircraft on the tarmac being doused by emergency vehicles arrayed around it, with passengers apparently making their way out of the aircraft towards the terminal building. Now, it's just far too early to say precisely what caused this to happen. It is worth noting, perhaps, that Toronto has seen some pretty severe winter weather over the past few days. Just over the weekend alone, some 22 centimetres of snow fell on the city, which has brought big parts of the city to a standstill effectively. And that also caused a slew of cancellations on Sunday, which Toronto Pearson International had said on Monday morning that they were working hard to clear the backlog of. They had said they were expecting around 130,000 passengers on around 1,000 flights to be travelling through Pearson International on Monday. Now, all flights were grounded temporarily on Monday afternoon, but they did resume from about 5 p.m. local time. I think, reaction in the public has been heightened perhaps by these several separate incidents involving various aircraft in the US over the past 2 weeks. It is far too early to say, however, exactly what caused this crash at Toronto Pearson International on Monday afternoon. And the investigating authorities have said that they will be issuing updates throughout the day on Tuesday to try and offer, or get close at least, to some kind of explanation as to how a passenger plane carrying 80 people on board ended up overturned on its back on the tarmac at Canada's busiest airport.
Thomas Lewis there sending us that report from Toronto. Listening to that was Charles Hacker, Russia analyst, author of Zero Sum, The Arc of International Business in Russia. He's also today's paper reviewer. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Emma.
Let's dovetail this neatly. What have the papers been saying about this? Because obviously the pictures are breathtaking when you see, as Thomas said, plane on its back, smoke and flames coming off its belly and being covered in foam and thick snow. But it all comes at interesting times for North American aviation.
That's right. So if we look at a context piece in the New York Times with a headline that says string of air crashes in 2025 has rattled travelers. And the New York Times reminds us that the incident in Toronto is part of a string of incidents in North America, including the January 29th collision between an American Airlines jet and an Army helicopter, in which all passengers on board both vehicles died. There was a medical jet that crashed in Philadelphia on January 31st. There was a regional plane that crashed in Alaska on February 6th. And the media across the United States are also pointing out that these incidents are taking place as employees at the Federal Aviation Administration in the U.S. are being laid off as part of President Trump's government cutbacks program. More than 100 individuals who are all in their probationary periods at the FAA have been told to leave their jobs. And, while there isn't a direct relationship between what's happening in the skies and what's happening on the ground in the FAA, the two are traveling very close together.
Thank you very much indeed for that. The New York Times has a very good sort of running ticker. It's currently got a very good account of people who were the passengers on board who were effectively ready to, get off the plane, go home, see their loved ones, carry on with their lives. And before they knew it, they were upside down. The accounts are incredibly vivid. What was really nice is one person just went, the most powerful part of today was that there was just people, no countries, no nothing. It was just people together helping each other. And that sort of supersedes absolutely every kind of bit of reorganisation or structural problems or anything like that.
You would like to think that in times of emergency, all of those sorts of things fade in importance. And the most important thing is to get out alive, and make sure that everyone is safe.
Absolutely. Right. Let's have a look at the way that the Russian media is responding to these astonishing talks in Saudi Arabia today between the Russian government and the American government. Twofold aim for this one. First and foremost is to normalise relations between the two countries, which is unprecedented, absolutely jaw-dropping. And the next one is to organise an end of the war in Ukraine without actually Ukraine being around to talk about what they want to do. What are the Russians saying about this?
So I did a little bit of browsing of broadsheets and tabloids and leading newspapers coming out of Moscow, and they're a little bit all over the place, to be quite honest with you. I mean, naturally, the news of the summit in Saudi Arabia dominates the headlines in the Russian media. Each of these papers takes a slightly different take. So we started with one of the tabloids, a very popular one called Komsomolskaya Pravda, which means the Komsomol Truth, Komsomol being the former Communist Youth Association. And what Komsomolskaya Pravda warns us, perhaps in a cautionary tone, is not to consider this meeting to be a summit on resolving the war in Ukraine. The essence of negotiations, Komsomolskaya Pravda tells us, is that this is discussing how to approach a dialogue. So we're meeting to talk about meetings, if you are a reader of Komsomolskaya Pravda. If you go to Moskovsky Komsomolets, which is probably one of the most popular newspapers, also a bit tabloidy in Russia, what Moskovsky Komsomolets, the Moscow Komsomol, tells us is that the meeting in Saudi Arabia is coming on the heels of an absolutely failed and collapsed European summit in Paris,
right,
where nothing interesting happened and all they talked about was continuing the war. Finally, if we look at Izvestia, which is a slightly more sober sort of broadsheet newspaper in Russia, they tell us that the purpose of this meeting is to restore the entire spectrum of relations between the United States and Russia, and Ukraine might show up on the agenda.
Okay, which one's right, Chuck?
They're all right.
They're Russian.
They all have their points to make, and they all have their axes to grind. What all of them do say, and I think this is the sort of hidden message beneath all of this, is whatever happens in Saudi Arabia, all of the newspapers are seeing this as a run-up to an eventual meeting between Trump and Putin. Some of these newspapers say that it may actually take place in a number of days.
Finally, talk to me about another item in another newspaper as we go around. Let's have a look at something in the Japan Times.
Right. So we're looking at the Japan Times, which is telling us all about how badly Japan is doing at teaching its students English, under a headline that says Japan's English language education doesn't pass the test. We learn a lot of very interesting things about Japan, and that is that Japanese students begin learning English in the 3rd grade. So that is fairly early in primary school. Yeah. You are learning the global lingua franca. The problem is that a lot of students are not doing very well on their Japanese language exams. And one of the things that I found most interesting about all of this is that there is a national speech competition, including the most famous national Japanese English language speech competition. It is called the His Imperial Highness Prince Takamoto Trophy All Japan Inter-Middle School English Oratorical Contest. And I believe the winner of the contest is the person who can pronounce the name of the contest correctly. Japan has a way to go in improving its English language instructions. Scores are falling, and naturally, to become competitive in the global economy, scores are going to have to come up.
The article makes a very good point that you can sit and learn verbs until the end of the earth, but that is boring and it requires awful mental effort. But the moment that you realise the magic of communication in a foreign language, that is when fires are lit.
That's right. There's a balance to be struck in teaching any foreign language. And you're right to say that the article in the Japan Times points out that learning English in Japan has become boring. And when you're just conjugating verbs endlessly, it doesn't really teach you how a living language works. And any of us who has learned a foreign language understands that, yes, you have to understand adjectives and nouns and adverbs and verbs and all of these things, but you have to be able to get out in the streets and talk.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Charles Hecker. You're listening to Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. The time's 7:31 here in London. A quick look at the headlines. Israel's defense ministry says it's setting up a body for what it calls the voluntary departures of Palestinians from Gaza. The move would be in line with a plan proposed by the US President Donald Trump to forcibly displace the Strip's residents. Israel has begun to withdraw its troops from Lebanon in accordance with the terms of a ceasefire with the militia group Hezbollah. It will still maintain a military presence in 5 outposts in the country, however, which either provide vantage points or lie close to communities in northern Israel. And doctors in Rome are continuing to treat the Pope for what the Vatican has called a complex clinical situation. It says the Pope, who's 88, has developed a polymicrobial infection of the respiratory tract. It's prompted doctors at Rome's Gemelli Hospital to change the course of treatment. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, at the recent World Government Summit in Dubai, one theme stood out: agility and placemaking in development. But how can cities balance pedestrian-friendly infrastructure without slowing real estate growth? Monocle's head of radio, Tom Edwards, caught up with Hawazan Esber, who's principal at Plus Alpha, a consultancy firm in Dubai. And he began by asking Hawazan about how architectural engineer training in Japan has informed his approach.
Japan is all about commitment, discipline, and ownership. And I think the speed at which Dubai grew required a lot of that. Some people use that discipline, some people use the commitment, the ownership. Some had other methodology, but for me, that's what worked best, the sense of ownership.
And tell me about that period, because you described it as sort of when everything was happening. Once you then start to get consolidation, and I guess the sort of the pace of change, different ambitions become evident. How does that change your approach? Because I suppose there was a bit of that feeling of like the pursuit west, this kind of narrative. As things change and the market consolidates, presumably your approach also has to change and adapt.
Of course.
Are you a master of adaptability, do you think?
Yeah, agility is the key in Dubai because when this market started, specifically in real estate, we're trying to get the best that is out there and bring it to Dubai. The last decade has been the opposite, actually. If you want something that has been done properly, you come to Dubai in terms of operation, in terms of design, in terms of, the mixed use. This is becoming really a city with a lot of mixed use projects. We did not have that in the past. And I think we're going to have more and more of that, where people, can really spend the whole day living, playing, and working in the same location.
I guess one of the things that we always think of with Dubai is how well coordinated everything is and how well all the different interests are interlaced. Is that true? I guess for something to seem so seamless takes a lot of work.
So
does it work like that?
As a private developer, or most of my career was a private developer, I shouldn't be saying that. But to be frank, the public realm was always the last thing we thought about. You can see that even on the level of the infrastructure, everything is run for cars. And it's fantastic, it flows very well. But when it comes to pedestrians, cyclists, jogging, and all of that, the placemaking, I think now we can say that the government is really pushing very strongly on that front. And the private developers also have realized that unless they have solid elements of placemaking in their developments, they're going to be beaten by the competition. So I can say confidently that the past 4 to 5 years, we have seen a surge in interest in placemaking and making these places, more livable.
So let's talk about sort of the longer term investing horizon, because you already talked about mixed use and the opportunities and challenges there. If we talk about things like the demographic shift here, from where people are coming to settle here, maybe looking to settle permanently in a way perhaps they didn't a generation ago, how do you sort of incorporate those big demographic shifts, these big secular shifts, into your planning and strategy? Because presumably that also changes with time and poses different questions at different times.
Yes, and Dubai changes a lot. So I'm going to share, there are some statistics recently, but I'm going to share my personal experience. A lot of myself included and friends and family, when they first came to Dubai, the span was 4 to 6 years tops. And I see more and more people just staying. I mean, I've been here now for 25 years. Most of the people I know have either a plan to retire in Dubai or actually to retire back home, but to have a second home in Dubai where, for many reasons, the beautiful weather, the safety, the security, the lifestyle, and some also tax purposes. You see a lot of people actually already living in Dubai that want to permanently stay here or have a permanent relationship, or you have newcomers. And we have seen that surge during the COVID period. A lot of people came and realized that, I can run actually my business online out of Dubai. They still fly in and out, but we can see people that were more interested in secondary homes, actually investing into primary homes. And that led the surge into luxury and uber luxury market recently.
And so the portfolios you manage, the advice that you give, Hawazen, you have to adapt to try and reflect those.
If your mindset that change is consistent and constant, then I think it's more fun. For sure, the requirements for residents and even for office owners or users have changed dramatically, especially post-COVID. I think this has provided some challenges, but also, frankly, some opportunities where you can have more flexibility in your large master plans to accommodate for these changes, and these changes are going to keep happening. We often recommend that any master plan that is beyond 5 to 10 years needs to accommodate what the teenagers currently want, because they're going to be the residents of this in the future. So we have focus groups with teenagers, sometimes school kids. You get some very interesting feedback, how they think the future is. I'm sure you're also part of that movement. And I find it actually that challenge, we take it at heart and we find it part of our job actually.
That's good. I love interrogating. Sometimes they might be a bit diffident, some of these teenagers, right?
Yes.
Or are they actually happy? They're happy to give you.
Actually depends who you send, but yes, for the small kids, we actually ask them to draw.
Oh, okay.
They are very good at drawing what they think. They have less vocabulary to express it. And once they draw it, you can discuss about it and suddenly you can have some very interesting insight.
That was Hawazen Esber talking to Monocle's Tom Edwards in Dubai. You're listening to Monocle Radio. Now, to mark the 18th anniversary of the homeware brand A Vida Portuguesa, New York's Museum of Modern Art invited the company's founder, Catarina Portas, to create a pop-up shop in its design store. Monocle's Fernanda Augusta Pacheco spoke to Catarina about her collaboration with the museum and the importance from keeping craft traditions in Portugal alive.
I did the shop for the Portuguese because I thought it was important. We are makers of excellent products, and we are makers many times for foreign brands. And I wanted to show the beautiful work, the very good work these old brands are doing still, and also a little bit of economic literacy about we should buy our own products. I thought it was interesting for foreign people also. It was a way to discover something about the country, the shops. And so since the beginning, I had the products explained in Portuguese and in English. And then when the tourism began, of course, people were very interested in coming to the shop. So tourism has been very important for us, of course.
And we here in Monaco, we value Portugal. It's a big market for us. It's beautiful. We like the quality of life in the country. But there's also concerns. For example, I don't know if you've seen this, but in Porto, Casa dos Linhos, I think they've closed. Yeah. So I think the work you do is very valuable in terms of protecting the manufacturing in Portugal, which you say has a long tradition, and not just in the country. Sometimes Portuguese companies making products for other countries as well. So it's a very valuable thing to help the Portuguese local industry as well, no?
Yes, of course. But even for old shops like Armazém dos Linhos, in the new shop in Riyadh now, we have a whole section selling the kind of Portuguese chintz that Armazém dos Linhos is the last company to print in Portugal. This is one of the problems of tourism, of course. In Portugal, in Lisbon, 20 years ago, I started noticing that many of the old shops were closing, also because of foreign investment. People were buying buildings and then renovating completely the buildings, so closing these shops. And so I tried with the city council to launch a program which is called Lojas com História, that defend these old stores. And then it went into the law, national law, and so Porto also has its program. But they can do many things. But Armazém dos Linhos was a special situation because it was a very old situation before the program started. So they couldn't legally, the city council couldn't save the shop. They are now looking for a bigger shop. We'll see.
Well, I'm very glad you're saying this. And by the way, I'm very glad as well that now we can find a Vida Portuguesa at MoMA. At the moment, there's kind of a pop-up shop at the museum, which is fantastic news. So did the museum approach you? How did that work? And I think it's such a way, I think a lot of people that perhaps never been to Portugal, they'll be able to see your products, which is fantastic.
Yes, it was such a surprise for us. The day we received an email from the MoMA Design Store director, he knew, he had been in Portugal, he knew about Vida Portuguesa, he visited our stores, and what he explained in the talk, in the opening of the pop-up in New York, was that it seemed to him that it was a concept very different from other shops he knows in several countries, or like Maison Empereur in Marseille, that has a special spirit. And so he sent this invitation. So we have been working for 1 year and a half. The team of MoMA Design Store came to Portugal. We choose together the products. And so we have a pop-up store in the Soho shop, and also another small one in 53rd Street, just in front of the museum. And we are also on the MoMA Design Store online shop.
It's a great selection of products as well.
Because we have different things, you see. I think difference and local are very powerful in today's world, where everything is so similar. We see the same things everywhere, the same brands, the same shops, the same restaurants. Why traveling if the world is going to be all similar?
Completely agree.
So I think one of the solutions for this is the local and the difference, to do different.
That was Catarina Portes, the founder of Vida Portuguesa. And the pop-up store is open at MoMA till the 10th of March. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
.44 here in London. Let's talk design with Samantha T, who's writer, editor, consultant, who normally is on the line from Paris, which is lovely. Today, even lovelier, Samantha C is in the studio. A very good morning to you, Sam.
Good morning.
Welcome to Midori House. How lovely to have you with us.
It's so lovely to be here.
Feel welcome and warm, I'm hoping. Warm on a free... Sorry about London.
London's always perfect.
Oh, well, okay. I'm delighted to hear it from someone who lives in Paris. And we'll be going to Paris in a little while to talk about the opening of the Monocle Cafe. You will have a new destination to explore when you go home this afternoon. But Sam, thank you for coming in with a list of design stories for us. Let's talk about Colin McDowell, an absolutely glorious voice in British journalism in design and fashion.
I absolutely love Colin McDowell. I feel like I know everything about fashion by reading his work in the Sunday Times mainly. So Kerry Taylor Auctions, which is based in London, is going to sell, this is part one of some of the things that he's selling, which includes magazines, invitations, and, other really fun things. So, from today, there's going to be an online auction going on until the 25th. And of course, Colin is one of the world's leading journalists, historians, and curators in the fashion industry. And this is part one of his extensive library. It includes British and American Vogue and Harper's Bazaar from the 1920s onwards. And what I think is really interesting, actually, are the rare show invites from brands such as Alexander McQueen, Chanel, Dior. And actually, there's a fax letter signed by Alexander McQueen himself after Colin gave him a really caustic review of his spring-summer 2001 collection for Givenchy. There's also going to be a really great saddlebag invitation from Christian Dior from John Galliano that is estimated to sell between £400 and £600.
It's absolutely incredible when you look at the collection that he's got. I mean, just browsing through the lots, which is always joyful. You have complete editions of Harper's Bazaar 1996, 1992, absolutely everything. It's almost as if he has, almost as if you were to get his entire collection, it effectively documents fashion throughout not just a decade, but through the best part of half a century. And it's moments like this that one feels a little sad that it is being split up.
But it might go to one big collector. We don't know. What I think is also great, yes, it is, half a century. We're able to see and track things like social codes, what's going on in culture and society, and also how we've evolved and changed in the way that we write and how we view fashion as a subject matter, which I think is really great, aside from, of course, the amazing visuals. And
when we look at that now, I mean, obviously, sitting under the roof of Monocle, we know the importance of print.
Absolutely.
And when we look at the way that Colin McDowell's catalogues of cataloguing of every sort of like catalogue of fashion history, all the great publications, one wonders whether that a similar collection is being made now, whether there is a sort of a young Colin McDowell who's sitting there buying every single edition of everything that's in print. I mean, one really hope this is the case. But one wonders whether the fact that, you're sitting with your phone in your hand, I'm sitting with a computer screen in front of me, there's no paper. And that the importance of paper as that, just not that marker, but also that way of displaying beautiful things, which you just cannot replicate on a screen.
Also a really great reference point, a reference book for what was. And what I think is great about that is, you're right, it is about a visual culture that we don't see anymore, whether we're displaying it in our houses, in our offices or whatnot. It's something we can pick up, we can see, we can browse through. And it always conjures up memories for me as well. Whereas now I'm flipping through things that are so quick that I read something, it just doesn't have the same impact as it once did when, I was picking up a magazine and really spending time holding it physically, looking through it, flipping through it, and, just really loving the print.
Yes, it being part of you as much as it being part of us. I mean, just looking at the collection, because obviously you do what you always do when everybody goes back to that period in time when you're like between 18 and 25. That's when you create your cultural identity.
Yes.
And just looking back to the lot for 1992, which was when I paid an awful lot of attention. I remember being a subscriber to Vogue and just looking at those pictures now, and it transports you back to a place in time. It also transports you back to a place in fashion and to a place in personal identity as well. And one wonders with the absence of paper now, that how we will form our future identities, because everything's whizzing past so fast now.
Everything's whizzing so past. I think that's why you have so many, short sort of 6-week subgenres of different cores, as they say on TikTok, that has come about. Because
no idea what you just said.
There's no longevity. There's no proper subculture. And when you look at magazines now, unfortunately, you see the budget, whereas, in the 90s, it was a glorious time to be in print. It was a glorious time to collect print. And I love that it's having a resurgence right now. I think that's going to be extremely popular. I definitely think, as well, the invites, which are so creative, and they're a great way to showcase what's upcoming for the collections. That's going to be really interesting because that is such an insider thing. Anyone could have bought a Vogue in 1992. Not everyone could have attended a Chanel show by Karl Lagerfeld in 1992 with a personalized invite. So I think that's also going to be really interesting.
Indeed, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, and I imagine you are because you listen to Monocle Radio, try Fernando Augusto Pacheco's The Stack on a Saturday. Furthermore, actually, go and buy a copy of Monocle. And in addition to that, actually, go and buy a copy of Confect magazine, which does a completely different thing. Instead of not just cataloguing, the fashion of the moment, that's kind of not what it's about. It's about making beautiful things that will last and will give us something that we can go back to. And so when, in 50 years' time, when there's the equivalent of Colin McDowell, someone will say, gosh, they had all the Confect magazines. Briefly, what else is happening in the world of design?
Well, Gufram, Italian brand, they are actually going minimalist. So they've unveiled the boring cactus. So they've reimagined their infamous iconic cactus from 1972, and they've changed it from the beautiful bright greens and different colors that it's come in into a very minimalistic gray, which I think is great because there is a real beauty in when you've gone so maximalist in taking it back completely the opposite direction. So I think that's really cool.
Okay, explain a little bit more about the, I think they're saying a cactus so boring it becomes brilliant. What's the thinking behind it?
Well, it's an iconic piece for the brand. And I think that, it's been reinterpreted by people like, A$AP Rocky, for example. Different colorways, different iterations of it. But it's always been quite a bright aesthetic. Now they're taking it down. They're doing the complete opposite. I think that's quite brilliant in the sense that, they're managing to sort of embrace the monotony of everyday life, but also striking a really beautiful balance with beautiful design.
I'm not entirely sure how monotonous a 1.7 metre tall cantilevered-armed 2,165 noduled grey cactus can be. I'm not entirely sure what you have in your house, but
it's a great coat rack.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Samantha C., thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist live on Monocle Radio. Now, this week, as we just heard, Monocle's opening a brand new retail and cafe space in the heart of the 2nd arrondissement in Rue Bachaumont. It serves up beautiful coffee, gorgeous treats and very nice wine as well. A very welcome addition to a lively cafe scene, which already has a rather marvellous reputation. Well, Monocle's Andrew Muller caught up with Paris Bureau Chief Simon Bouvier yesterday to hear more about the grand opening.
Simon, first of all, tell us a bit about what you can see when you look at our new establishment in Paris. What does it look like?
Well, Andrew, when you're standing outside, you could see giant Bonjour Paris lettering on the front windows to welcome our customers. The first ones came in yesterday. We opened yesterday morning for the first time. Once you walk in, the first thing that you see is the friendly smiles of the staff, of course, behind the bar.
Hang on. This doesn't sound like a very authentically Parisian experience.
Yeah. Well, some of them are French and some of them are not. I'll let you decide what that means about who's smiling and who isn't. But we are very rigorous about that during the interview process here for who is behind the Monocle Cafe bar. But in any case, on the right, there's going to be a huge selection in our kiosk wall of international titles that we admire, and also the French press, some German papers. So readers from all over the world can find some sustenance there to go with their café, their croissant, and other delicacies that are on offer.
I mean, if we're not making any concessions to local Parisian tradition by hiring outright hostile waiting staff, are there any other specifically Parisian touches to the cafe?
Well, I'm afraid, Andrew, that the accordion in the soundtrack was also vetoed. I'm sure you'll be very disappointed to hear that. But there's a mix. We're trying to bring a French touch to what we normally do in London and in Zurich, but it's still very much Monocle. So you won't find a nationalist wine list. There will be some very good French stuff, but also some Austrian wines. You'll find some delicious charcuterie and cheeses, but you'll also find some Japanese sandwiches and cheesecakes. It's a mix and match with a bit of a French touch.
Okay, now you're just making everybody hungry. But those first customers you mentioned who came in yesterday, as far as you could tell, what did they make of it?
Well, I think it was a combination of people who know us and who were very excited that we were open here. Some were visitors from out of town who showed us pictures on their phone of their visits to the Hong Kong airport shop or the Toronto cafe or the Tokyo one. So they were very excited to tick this one off their Monocle bingo list. And others still were just passing through and thought, oh, this looks cozy. What is it? And so we had to explain to them what Monocle is while they were waiting for their coffees.
Well, on practical matters then, where can listeners find this place?
So the address is 16 Rue Bachaumont in the 2nd arrondissement of Paris. It's not too far from La Bourse de Commerce, the Fondation Pinault Contemporary Art Museum, or the Les Halles subway stop. It's in the Montorgueil neighborhood, which historically used to be a big market street, and then when the big grocery market got moved to the outskirts of Paris, this area became a bit of a gray zone until the city of Paris made it a pedestrianized it pretty heavily in the 1990s. And since it's become a hub for local entrepreneurs and restaurants. So we fit right in here.
Well, just finally then, Simon, and I don't think we need to be self-conscious about this given that this entire item is a shameless plug, but let's do a shameless plug within that, in that obviously opening any kind of cafe in Paris, all jokes aside, is a fairly audacious undertaking. This is pretty much the city that invented the idea of the cafe. So what do you think Monocle's cafe is going to add to that? What do we bring that's a bit different?
Well, to your earlier point, I think that we will have more agreeable waiting staff than in most cafes. You will find vests, but you will not find bow ties. Again, I think it's the mix. I think, as you say, there are so many cafes and nice terraces that are traditional and French, and I think that we want to show that we respect that, and we want to offer that to visitors who are in town for that, but also we want to be an embassy, really, for everything Monocle. So that means a menu with specialties from around the world, but it also means having all of the collabs that we're proud of on sale in our shop, and it means having the radio studio here. I've had, during our chat yesterday about the current crisis going on with the European leadership and defense, I had some curious patrons poking their head through and looking into Studio 5 to see what was going on. The door was locked, so they did not enter. But it's everything Monocle going on in the same place at the same time.
Well, I am looking forward to broadcasting from there myself one day, he said hintingly. Simon Bouvier, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Well, please make that happen as soon as possible, and I'll make sure they alter the playlist to include some accordion to welcome you here.
Andrew Muller and Simon Bouvier there talking about the new Monocle Cafe opening in Rue Bachaumont in Paris. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Hassan Anderson, Laura Kramer and Tom Webb. Our researcher was Maisie Ringer and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.